Hi, this is Jennifer Gonzalez with the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. This is episode 5 where we interview AJ Juliani to talk to him about 20% time. I had heard about 20% time. I had a pretty vague idea of what it was like or what it was about. And I wanted to talk to somebody who had really tried it and had maybe gone through some trial and error with it to see what kinds of problems he had, what it actually looked like on a day-to-day basis, whether he encountered any resistance from students, and just to basically try to answer a lot of the questions that people would have if they were thinking about trying it but were unsure. So before I put the interview on, I would just like to ask you if you are listening to this just as a regular download. We do have the podcast now on iTunes. And if you are listening to it on iTunes, I would really appreciate it if you do enjoy it, that you would go and give us a rating on iTunes, because as of right now, we don't have any ratings or not enough for it to actually have any stars. So if you are feeling like you want to support the podcast and have it reach more people, then go ahead and do that. And so I will go ahead and get us started on our interview with AJ Juliani. So if you could just start like as if you're talking to somebody who's never heard of it, what is 20% time? And also could you explain sort of, is there the difference between 20% time and genius hour and whether those two terms are interchangeable or not?
For 20% time and genius hour, the idea really came from what Google does with their 20% time. So they give their employees 20% of their time as a policy, since kind of Google started out, to work on anything they're passionate about, anything that interested them. So that 20% time came from Google, and a lot of Google products came out of that 20% time. Big products like Gmail and Google Earth, Google Orchid, like a lot of different products came out of them. Mm-hmm. When Marissa Mayer, who's now the head of Yahoo, was working at Google, she said that almost 50% of their new products that actually came to fruition came out of that 20% time.
Wow.
And so it's just this innovative time. And Genius Hour is a very similar idea that comes from the work that Daniel Pink did in the book Drive. Mm-hmm. And in it, he talks about FedEx Days and Genius Hour, which is that same thing, taking an hour out of the work week, or for students, taking an hour out of the classroom kind of learning to, again, pursue your passions and learn and work and create whatever you want. So 20% time in the classroom and Genius Hour in the classroom came from, these kind of business models where very, successful companies were doing this. Google, 3M, HP, Yahoo. There's a lot of successful companies doing this. And so it came out of that idea, and there was a number of educators, I just happen to be one of them, that jumped on kind of saying, you know what, if it works for Google, it'll probably work in the classroom as well.
Yeah.
And so I started it with a group of my 11th grade English students. And pretty much the basic gist of it, I said to my students was, look, I know you're in 11th grade and you're motivated extrinsically by grades, and pretty much your whole life you've just been playing this game at school, right? Mm-hmm. Teacher tells you to do this. If you do it well, you get this grade and you move on. And that's it, right? But the real world doesn't necessarily work like that.
Right.
You can't really find a job that way. And so what we're teaching them in school is kind of breaks. And I saw that with my own siblings and friends. And they just kind of got out there and they told me it's not that easy. I can't just work hard and be successful. There's more to it than that.
Yeah.
And so I presented to my students, and probably half the class was like, what are you talking about? And the other half was really excited. But really that kind of started our journey. And Genius Hour kind of is the same thing. There was a number of educators that did that same thing, and not 20% of the time, but an hour a week of learning what you want, what you're passionate about, and kind of not really giving those restrictions that we normally give in a general school setting.
So this 11th grade class, I've been thinking about this. Where did they fall in terms of general ability? Were they advanced kids, or was it a mix?
Yeah, so I had two 11th grade classes that I did this with, and one was our honors kids and one was our academic kids. So
Okay.
completely mixed in terms of that. And actually, you would never know by the final products, like which kid was an honors kid, which kid was an academic kid.
Really?
At all. And actually, most of the students that I had problems with were honor students who just wanted like a worksheet or a paper assignment that they could just do, get done, check off their list, and move forward.
Yep.
Now, again, I had great, honor students doing some amazing things and kind of vice versa, but there was really no difference between the two and their final products and what they did.
That's funny because that is sort of in line with what I've learned too about gifted kids, that they really don't like that unstructured, or a lot of times they naturally kind of freak out because they know how to follow structured situations really, really well, and they've built their whole career up to that point on that. So I think my first thought, and what I've seen from a lot of the comments on your site too, is that there's this concern that kids are just going to blow it off, or they're going to just not do it, or because there doesn't seem to be a lot of accountability built into it. And did you have problems with some kids that saw that as a slack day to do nothing?
So I say the first thing is, as teachers sometimes, we think we just know best.
Yeah.
Right? We're like, well, this is the way we've always done it, so this is the way we should do it.
Right.
But if you look at the research, all the research says that extrinsic motivation really just doesn't work as well as intrinsic motivation.
Yeah.
And that's where kind of Daniel Pink's book Drive comes into play. And so I would say first thing, just look at the research on what actually motivates students and what motivates human beings in general. And it's not always the carrot and the stick, and actually that motivation doesn't work as well if somebody's into it. So I share that information with my students, and I share it with teachers as well. But you still have students who are going to balk for two reasons. Number one, this is not how school is supposed to be.
Right.
So they've worked for, in my case, they're high school students. So for 10, 11, for how many years, they've been working and just following the same system of how school works. And then you flip it on its head and they're kind of angry, right? They're just confused but also angry that they have to spend this time. They're going to college in a year or two, and and that was kind of part of the reason. I didn't want them to just focus on grades. I wanted them to focus on learning. For those students, it's saying, hey, this is an opportunity to actually take freedom and turn it into something valuable. And so I had high school students, and I basically said to them, hey, when you go to college or when you go to get a job or something like that, once you leave high school, no one is telling you what to do with 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
You have to make all the decisions of what you're doing with those 8 hours. So your parents aren't telling you, your teachers aren't telling you, there's no one telling you what to do. How can you possibly be successful if the only way you have found to be successful is following the rules of what other people set out?
Right.
And so that kind of reasoning really worked well with students. The other set of students that might slack off are the students that are going to say, I really don't have any interest, I don't have any passions.
Right.
And for those students, I felt really bad that they felt that way, But so say the first couple sessions they're acting like that. I have them do activities to kind of figure out what they actually like doing, right?
Yeah.
So I would have them. One day I see them sitting there not really doing anything or having conversations and not doing anything. I'd have them fill out this little sheet that I gave them with 4 questions, like, what do you do when you're supposed to be doing like homework or something like that? Right? Is it doodle? You listen to music? Like, what are you doing when you're supposed to be doing something else? Second thing is, what do you do during your free time? Just list whatever, right? So what do you do after school? What do you do on the weekends? What do you do at night? And just list what you do. Third thing I do on that list is pretty much saying, okay, if you had the chance, all right, to get a job right now, what would your dream job be?
Okay.
And the fourth thing is, or the biggest thing is saying, in 10 years, what do you want your lifestyle to look like? So these questions are really good motivating questions to get students thinking about, okay, I want my lifestyle to be, I want to travel, like I want to be going to different countries, or I want to live at the beach, right? And And instead of saying just job and talking about lifestyle, it really helped the students to think about what their purpose was for learning, right? So, and then I had them fill like a March Madness bracket where we took some of the things they did and we filtered them down. So sometimes it was like video games was their favorite thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all right, have you ever thought about making your own video game?
Mm-hmm.
No, I never could do that.
Okay.
Actually, you could do that. And so those are the different things that we would work on with the students that were kind of struggling to figure out what their passions were.
Can you give me an example of a kid who really was sort of lost at the beginning, and what did they eventually land on?
Yeah, so one of my students really was just like, I don't feel like doing this. Like, I got too much other work. They worked after school. They're kind of the typical, like, I'm trying to just get my money type kid.
Yeah.
And so we started talking, and one of the things that he always did, and I could see on his papers, was just like doodling, like little, graphic type of stuff. And so we talked about that. I'm like, why do you doodle, like when I'm talking, we're doing stuff like that? He's like, I don't know, it's just kind of fun. And I'm like, well, do you have like a sketchbook? Do you do art or something? He's like, I don't really do art, but I do a lot. Like, he had his own book where he did drawings and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, have you ever thought about learning more about that? He's like, nah, not really. Like, I don't really see the point in it. And so I said, okay. Our next meeting, he came in and he had on this like really cool T-shirt, right? Uh-huh. And so me being a teacher, I'm kind of saying, hey, where'd you get that T-shirt from? He's like, oh, they were selling it at this concert I was at, et cetera, et cetera. I was like, oh, that's really cool. That looks like one of your drawings. Mm-hmm. So then it clicked for him. I'm like, you can make T-shirts.
Oh.
and so I said also you can make money off those T-shirts. I don't care if you sell them. That would be awesome if you sold.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a lot of the students that I had that kind of maybe didn't find their passion right away. I kind of just asked, like, well, do you want to make some money? Like, what could you do to make money? Like, oh, I want to make a rap album. Okay, let's do it. Like, it was kind of like I was trying to get them to think and dream bigger than they were. Instead of just saying I wanted to rap or I wanted to draw, it was like, well, what could you do with that rap? What could you do with that drawing?
Right.
Get them to think a little bit bigger.
Well, and especially now with technology, they literally can start to learn the nuts and bolts of doing all those things. So if someone were to walk in on the 20th, it was one day a week, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So what would they see on a Friday if they walked into your class sort of in the middle of the year?
They would see chaos. They would see some students out in the hallway, some outside, some on computers, some working in groups, some talking to me. They would see really chaos, and I'm not even saying organized chaos because it was not. It was just chaos, and my role as the teacher was really not like a guide on the side, but more of a coach.
Okay.
Right. So that old guide on the side, like I feel like the kids are still in rows, and I'm just walking around next to kids. It wasn't like that, right?
Yeah.
So you think about like a sports practice. I was a football coach.
Uh-huh.
I got 11 players on the field doing 11 different things. And as a football coach, I'm responsible that they all know what they're supposed to be doing, that they have training and practice, so when it's actually game day, those 11 people can do something to actually make something successful happen. I was doing the same thing in the classroom. So we had things put in place. So they were documenting what they were doing on a blog. Sometimes they did video blogs. We had different stages along the way, but students were at different parts of the stages. So I had to really kind of see, like, where are you on the continuum of learning versus creating, right? Should I push you towards creating or pull you back and say you still need to learn more? And then it was just a lot of conversations between students, between myself. And so if you walked in, you would have been at first kind of blown away by what was going on. But you probably would have saw a student doing something cool and went over and had a conversation with them and then be really drawn in.
Yeah.
And that's what happened when we had administrators and other teachers come in, was the first kind of shock of what's going on. But then the conversations that followed were really fun.
So let's talk a little bit more about that learning, creating continuum. I wanted to learn a little bit more about how the whole thing is structured. There was, I've learned a little bit about a pitch day, And I'd seen in some of your writing about how you eventually discovered that kids needed to make some sort of a final product.
Yeah.
So how would you say the year is kind of structured?
I created an infographic on this too. It's called the Beginner's Guide to 20% Time in Education.
Okay.
So I can share that with you as well. But
okay.
Really, it was a lot of trial and error, and it was also really learning from other teachers who were doing this too, and was working well with their students. So people like Kevin Brookhauser, he's done a lot of stuff on 20% time. The initial stage is the why, so kind of explaining to students the purpose behind this. Right? If I'm a teacher, I want to know the purpose behind what I'm doing. Same thing I should give that to students. And then it was kind of the idea creation, just like figuring out what you want to do, what you're passionate about, what you're interested in. That is the hardest part. So the hardest part is getting students to choose a topic that they're truly interested and passionate about and have some type of purpose, right? So that scene is all about. There's going to be kids that know what they want to do, they're high flyers, they're off and running. Right? And you can't really hold them back. You have to let them go.
Right.
And then really work in small groups and individually with other students through some of the strategies I was saying to kind of work with them. Once everybody had kind of figured out what they wanted to do, we had a Shark Tank pitch deck.
Okay.
So students would create 4 slides on like a PowerPoint or Haiku deck or Prezi, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And the 4 slides would be first, what are you doing? Right? So what are you doing for 20% time?
Right.
Second slide is why are you doing it? Okay, explain your purpose. Third slide is how are you going to accomplish it? Right. So what are the steps you're going to take? Kind of like an action plan. How are you going to accomplish it?
Right.
And the fourth was how are you going to measure your success? Those 4 slides did a couple things. Number one, it really knuckled down their project, what they were doing. And then also because they were presenting it to the class in like rapid fire succession, like 2 minutes a pop, and just students getting up there and presenting.
Yeah.
It also generated this positive peer pressure, I like to call it.
Yeah.
Because you start seeing 3 kids in a row that are doing like awesome work, and then you're getting up there and kind of like feeling self-conscious, like, am I going big enough here?
Yeah.
And it was like this positive, there was no grades attached, but it was just positive peer pressure of saying, wow, like, Joe's doing that. Like, I didn't think Joe was that interested, and it was kind of just really generated. So a lot of times that week after we did that Shark Tank pitch day, I had a lot of conversations with students that wanted to like up their game, because not because I said anything, but just because they saw what their other classmates were doing.
Yeah.
So that was a really important step.
Did those kids re-pitch later?
They didn't re-pitch to the whole class, but they would share with me like what their change was.
Okay.
And that was part of the documenting. So we'd have them blogging, once a week, sharing what they're learning, what they're doing. And so that kind of learning and research process takes a couple weeks. And then they're really funneling into, all right, I've learned enough about building a computer, right? I've watched YouTube videos, I've read, I talked to a mentor or something like that, all those different ways that you're learning. And then it got to the point where it was, okay, now I have to do. Now, some students really wanted to jump into the doing, creating too early, and others were like scared. They were like, I still got to do some more research, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So that's the teacher's job to kind of coach up and see where they were.
Okay.
Then the creating process, they're video blogging about what they're doing, everything, and it's all leading up to that final presentation, which we did kind of TED style but shorter. And that final presentation was them pretty much saying, here's what I created and produced, here was my journey doing it, and here's why I think I was successful or not, which ties back to that pitch deck. And so that was kind of the whole thing. We normally try to bring in parents and other people, other students in to watch their final presentations, and that was really kind of the structure of it. And I know people do varying different things, but that's how a lot of folks in the 20% time community and Genius Hour are doing it now.
Do students ever completely switch their focus halfway through the year or partway through?
Yeah, and as a teacher, you have to decide too. Do you want to make it year-long? Do you want to make it a marking period? Do you want to do a short, like 6-week one to start off the year and then do a longer one so kids understand the process? And so there's some different ways you can do it, but there's lots of times where kids like, you know what, I thought I was into this, but I'm really not.
Yeah. I would think
They
seeing
switch
other
up,
kids'
you know?
work, seeing other people's work too would open up other possibilities that you didn't even consider before.
Yes, no, definitely, yes.
So, is any topic allowed? So, what if somebody wants to study bomb making or pornography or something where it's just not going to work for school? Do you just have that conversation with them? Because it seems like the initial sell on this is you can study whatever you're interested in.
Yeah. The whole thing is pretty much from the get-go saying you can study whatever you want, but this is still school.
Okay.
And I relate it back to Google as well. They can learn whatever they want, but it's still Google, right? So, you know, they're not gonna study those different types of things at Google because it doesn't kind of help in the whole process. You know, we talk about that in the beginning and talk about how a lot of times when people talk about thinking outside the box, they don't understand there's another box around that.
That's awesome. That's very true. Okay. So the way that you sort of describe it to them at the beginning is you can study pretty much anything you're interested in, but it just needs to be appropriate for school, or does it have to have some sort of academic tie-in?
Yeah, I didn't do any academic tie-in.
Okay.
I just said appropriate for school. However, other teachers have said, you know, I want to tie this to my subject area. So you can do 20% time or Genius Hour, but it still has to relate back to social studies in some way, or still has to relate back to math in some way. So that's why I said there's no like right way to do 20% time or Genius Hour.
Yeah.
It's more or less kind of saying, look, I want students to have the opportunity to learn what they want. Sometimes I'm going to place more restrictions, sometimes I'm not. For me, it was just school appropriate because for ELA, the whole documenting, reading, writing, speaking, listening was a part of the project, so I was covering those standards anyway.
Yeah, it's harder for me to imagine how you could make it work in math. Do you know of any math teachers that are really, really genuinely allowing kids to pursue passions and still making it tie into math?
Yeah, we have a 20% time community on Google+, and there's a number of math teachers in there that are doing this. They all do it in different ways, you know, so there's algebra teachers that are just making kids kind of focus on it has to be something based around, you know, those different types of algebraic concepts, right? Which could be starting a business and understanding how those things run, or even like doing the stock market, or, you know, like they have different things around it. And there's a number of math teachers also that have put some stuff up on the Genius Hour wiki space. You know, kind of examples of how they're doing it. So there's resources out there. If you type into Google probably like math teacher Genius Hour, math teacher 20% time, you're going to get resources. Okay.
I'm assuming that the response is probably similar for somebody who has like a second grade class. How do they do this differently?
So at Wissahickon, the school district I was previously at, we wrote 20% time into our 9th grade ELA curriculum. So we wrote it in there, which was pretty cool, which was great. But then also, there was a lot of other teachers in the district that wanted to do it. And so my 4th grade teacher kind of gave the student a couple options.
Okay.
He said, number one, you can learn and make something that like you're really interested in, like outside of school. Number two, you can dig deeper into something we already covered. So you like that dinosaur unit? Like, let's dig deeper into that. Or you like, you know, that space unit? Let's dig deeper into that. So kind of like an extension of what they're all already learning. And quite frankly, a lot of kids chose that.
Yeah.
Right? And then also, she said, you can like create something, like make something with your hands, like do like a cardboard project or something like Kane's Arcade, where you can kind of build something along those lines. So it kind of gave a couple different options. So it's still the freedom of that, and that whole kind of learning and documenting and presenting is very valuable. But I liked how she gave her students kind of some different directions of where to head, because at the elementary level, I thought that was really important.
Yeah, they needed a little bit more guidance. It couldn't just be left wide open.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, there's more elementary classrooms doing Genius Hour than I would say like high school math and science classrooms.
Well, I would think in an elementary class they have the full day kind of to play with, and they're not necessarily pushing out any particular content area.
Yeah.
in terms of what the kids are actually doing, like the real younger ones, they can't they haven't really been taught how to do internet research, or does the teacher sort of bring in lots of books and that kind of thing, or direct them to specific websites to look at?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the role of the teacher. Like, go into the library, finding books to do the research, or maybe like giving them some links depending on what your technology is in the classroom. That's kind of that role of the teacher, is really helping in the research and learning process. Whereas the role of the high school teacher is a little bit different, because it's kind of letting them know when they're done the learning and researching and need to start creating, kind of holding them along that line.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the no grades concept. One thing I was thinking of is if I'm a student who is doing sort of C work in your class, but I'm working really hard on Genius Hour, it might bother me that that's the part that doesn't get graded, and that my report card is still going to reflect the C work that I'm doing the other 4 days. Did you ever have that situation?
Yeah, there's probably most of the people that do 20% time or Genius Hour graded in some way, shape, or form.
Okay.
And when we wrote it into our 9th grade curriculum, and I wasn't teaching it, but we had other teachers teaching it, they wanted to grade it.
Okay.
What we did, though, was we didn't grade the final product, we graded the process. And we actually used the GRIT rubric. Have you ever seen that?
No, but I will look it up.
It's on my blog as well. The G stands for guts, the R stands for resiliency, the I for integrity, and the T for tenacity.
Okay.
And so it's grading how well you're displaying those throughout the process.
So it's a really enriched type of a participation grade, sort of.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you know what? The kids really liked it, because it was, maybe I wasn't successful with what I did, but you saw that I was working really hard and displayed these characteristics,
right,
and they got rewarded for that.
Okay, so that does contribute to their overall grade in the course then.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't do that, but a lot of the teachers do use some type of rubric. There's a Genius Hour rubric that Denise Krebs has created that I put in my book. So there are some other rubrics out there that people have used. Okay.
And so thinking about how you first got this started and what you know now, if you could go back to that first year with that 11th grade group, what would you do differently?
I would really push them to, I guess, dream bigger with their products and end goals. Because the really successful students were the ones that had a bigger purpose, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And the purpose is going to change. Like, we had one student that wanted to learn how to play the guitar and perform a song, right? But they knew nothing about music. So it was really hard. And when they got up in front of the class and struggled to get through this song and sing it, everybody really cheered, because we knew that it was difficult for that student.
Right.
But we had another student that already knew how to play guitar and wanted to make an album. And so when they performed the song, it's just it wasn't as much as that other student. Even though they did more per se,
right,
they didn't dream big enough with where they were, where the skill level already was. And so, like, I would have really pushed that student to do more of the producing and marketing and selling the album and talk about that process than just the writing of a song process, because they already were doing that, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So I really would have pushed them in the beginning to have a higher purpose with what they're doing.
Can you tell me about maybe one or two other really memorable student projects or focuses that really kind of came about during your time doing this?
Yeah. Two that really come to my mind were, we had a girl student who, she played 2 sports. I know she worked, and she wanted to learn sign language. And when she did the pitch day and she talked about why she wanted to learn sign language, is because she wanted to talk to her niece, who was 4 years old, and she was deaf, and so she needed to learn sign language. And she really wanted to do this, and she only knew like the alphabet, a couple things, because she didn't really have much time.
Yeah.
And so when she got up, and she had learned sign language, she did a great job. But when she got up in front of the presentation, and she did sign language to a song that she was going to do for her niece, I mean, people were crying. It was emotional, because you could see what that purpose was and how much it meant to her. and how happy she was to have the time to learn it.
Right.
You know? And there are actually two other people that, like, once she started going through, they're like, I really want to learn sign language too. So then there's a group of 3 people that did it, and it kind of just, it grew. And so that was one of my favorite memorable projects.
Yeah.
We also had a student, which wasn't as sentimental, but we had a 10th grade student that wanted to, he's really big into science. He was a self-proclaimed science nerd. And his biggest, the thing he hated most about science is that he felt that science was seen by most students as like something you had to do in a school lab with like a white coat on. And so he wanted to show that you could clone a plant in your kitchen using like basic products and stuff you could buy at Walmart.
Yeah.
And so he went through the whole process of cloning an actual carnivorous plant in his kitchen. And he wasn't successful with the carnivorous plant. He was successful with another plant, which was his presentation. I was like, you're way smarter than me. You're way more intelligent than me. But you also showed that, like, science is accessible. Like, how cool would it be to show a 5th grader that you could do this type of science in your own kitchen or something like that? And so his was just memorable because his purpose, again, was so strong of why he wanted to do it. And what the reasoning behind it was. So those two always stick out to my mind of a really successful project.
Oh, those are great. Those are really cool ideas. And so now the work that you've been doing now is to get this into more people's classrooms and to teach other teachers how to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just a firm believer in student choice being part of the learning experience.
And this is a nice way of structuring that because it's really easy to say that, but a lot of teachers don't know how to actually make that happen.
Right. And I think, there's lots of different ways to make it happen, but when you look at what drives creativity and what drives innovation in a school setting, and even outside the school setting, most of the time it's inquiry-based projects and student choice. So the research already, talks about that. And so the work that I'm doing is kind of saying, like, one of the most important things we can do for our students is to show them what it looks like when they have choice in their own learning, because that's what their life is going to look like.
Right.
I learned how to design websites. It wasn't because I took a class in it. I just learned online because I was interested in it. I wanted to design my own website.
Yep.
That was it. When I wanted to learn WordPress, it was the same thing. And that's how, like, we learn naturally all the time. But then for some reason in school, we revert back to this unnatural method of learning. And to me, it's a shame because we take students who are very curious by nature and kind of like knock the curious out of them, and then they tie what learning is to what school is, but they're completely different. So that's kind of what I've been doing with my book and just other things, is really trying to bring student choice back into that equation.
Yeah, let's talk about the book. This is the book, Innovation. Say the title for me.
Inquiry and Innovation in the Classroom.
Okay. And that just came out a few months ago, right?
Yeah, it just came out in June.
Okay. And it looks to me like it's sort of a handbook, basically, for doing Genius Hour.
Yeah, it walks teachers and administrators and parents through the why, why we should have this type of learning, the research and everything, how you can do it, how you can measure success, pitfalls that people have, how you can actually do it with teachers and professional development, and how you can do it with whole school communities as well. And there's a lot of research in it, but there's also a lot of stories of how teachers have done this, how schools have done this, and so I think that it's really practical. Which is the main thing what I wanted to do. I wanted to create something that was practical, not just like now and this year, but also like 10 years from now for student choice.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that that's the type of book that it is.
And you've got another book coming fairly soon? You're working on one right now?
Yeah, so I'm working on a book. I'm going to self-publish this one. It's called Scratch Your Itch. And really, it's kind of taking a lot of the ideas that I wrote about in inquiry innovation to another level. Like, I see that there's a systemic problem with, we have students who don't know what they're interested in leaving our schools. And then we have college graduates or students out in the real world that don't know like what jobs they want to do, and so they kind of just float, right? They go from like to these jobs that they're not really interested in, and they're living at home. They don't have like a path, right?
Right.
And then they eventually get a job because they have to pay bills and they have to start a family, and they end up working something that they're just not happy about. And so my book, Scratch Your Itch, is saying that in order to kind of find out what you're interested in, you have to learn. That's what it comes down to. So scratching your itch is saying, like, oh, I have this problem or I have this interest. We'll take time learning it and developing it. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have those new learning experiences, then we're never really going to figure out what our purpose is and what we're passionate about. And so it's going to be a short book, but it's the type of book that I would like to give my siblings, like my younger siblings. It's the type of book that I would like to give a high school senior when they graduate or a college graduate. And that's the type of book that I want it to be, where it's powerful for those students and young people, but also at the same time, if there's somebody who's 40 years old working on a job that don't like it, can be powerful for them as well.
Right.
So even though it has to do with learning, it's not an educational book per se. It's more a book about how to kind of like find your purpose and passion through learning experiences.
So it's for the student. It's not so. I mean, teachers would benefit from it, but it's really almost sounds like it's for students.
It is.
Yeah. All right, 2 more quick questions.
Sure.
Is there a wrong way to approach 20% time? Are there some don'ts that you can hand out to people?
The worst thing you can do is assign this project and sit back and say, all right, on you guys, 20% time, learn what you want. I'm here if you need me.
Yeah.
It's the worst way you can do it. It doesn't work out. The teacher has to be more active in this learning experience than anything else, because students need coaching. They need to be connected to the right resources, to the right people. They need help in their projects. There's going to be pitfalls and failures. And they need someone there to kind of say, that's okay. That's what it's all about.
Right. Have you seen teachers that try to overstructure it?
Yeah, I mean, there are teachers that try to overstructure it and make it more like project-based learning, but I don't mind that as much the first go-around, because I think sometimes teachers need to have that control. And if they did the project that way one time, I really feel like most of them will relinquish some more control the second time around. And so I'd rather have a teacher do it and really have it structured than not do it at all.
Okay, yeah. So if someone listening to this is thinking, okay, I really think I want to try this, what would be your recommended first couple of steps?
Joy Kerr put out a live binder, and she has been the best curator of 20% time in Genius Hour resources. So, like, if you just want like a resource dump, you can like type into Google Genius Hour live binder or Joy Kerr live binder, and she's curated almost every single like blog post, resource, book that's out there, and really you'll be able to kind of sift through which of those resources you want. And then I would say the next step is really kind of figuring out how you're going to make it work within the confines of what your school does, what your curriculum looks like, and what your class situation looks like. So you can't just jump into it without thinking about, like, okay, what's my school culture, or how's this going to go over? What's our curriculum look like? How's that going to work? And then also, what does my class makeup look like? And you got to think about it that way, because if you don't and you just go into a blind, then you're going to struggle with those different types of things that'll take away from the actual student learning.
So is it important to get the buy-in of sort of, if you work on a team of teachers, or to get, administrators to support it? Have there been teachers that do this kind of rogue?
Yeah, I mean, I did it rogue.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I think there's other teachers that maybe start out doing it rogue, but you still have to be transparent, right? So let people know you're doing it. Invite them to come in and see what it looks like. Share the research and the resources with them as well, so they are informed.
Okay.
So a lot of times, maybe you don't need permission, but you still need to inform people about the purpose behind this and why it works. And that's kind of what I wrote my book about. There's other people that have written books too, like Angela Myers, The Passion for the Classroom. Don Lectrick just came out with a book called Pure Genius. There's some other people as well. So there's resources out there. I would say get your ducks in a row with that, because then if the parents complaining around here, like
Yeah.
you're ready to go. And then you don't have to spend so much time worrying about those interferences coming into play.
Okay, that's good advice. So it probably isn't a good idea for somebody to hear this and say, okay, next Friday I'm going to give it a try. There should be some preparation.
Yeah, I definitely think so.
Okay. Anything else that you would want to add to this?
I think that we need to really look at, and one of the things I talk about in my book is we really need to look at how our learners have changed and how the world around them has changed. And I know sometimes that's hard as a teacher because we're kind of like living inside this box, and we got to write SLOs and SESS and IEPs and all these different things that kind of like keep us in this box. But if we really think about what's best for our students, it's allowing them to experience what it's like when they have their own learning path. And so maybe you can't do 20% time or Genius Hour, but what areas of your class and of your kind of activities can you give student choice? You know, maybe it's just a warm-up activity, or maybe it's a project that you always did, or maybe it's a paper. Just start small if you can't go all in, and find out like what that looks like and how students react to that choice. Because I think that's what's empowering, is the choice piece. It's empowering for teachers, and it's also empowering for the students.
Thank you so much for spending all this time with me. Your passion for this idea is just really evident, and I feel it seems like anytime I Googled 20% time in education, anytime I was looking yesterday for more resources, your name is attached to everything. So I really feel that you're sort of at the vanguard of this whole movement, and I'm just really honored that you were willing to talk to me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much to AJ Juliani for talking with me about 20% time. If you decide to try it and you want to tell us about it, come on over to cultofpedagogy.com, where you're going to find lots of other great stuff for teachers too. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.